Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the It's the Pictures podcast. This is episode 178, and I am your host, Max Colville. Joining me is my spectacular co host, Evan Crean. Hello, Evan.
Hey Max, what an introduction.
I'd like to say I was working on it for a long time, but I just thought it up now. Um, Evan and I are joined by a special guest, one that has been a guest on this podcast many times before, one Marshall Shaffer. Hello, Marshall.
Hello, it's good to be back. And welcome, Evan. I haven't been on the show since you joined, so
Yeah.
at least it makes it makes it fun and different.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Yeah, I'm eager to chat with you. I've heard you on many an episode, so I'm glad to be here.
All right, wonderful. And how are you guys doing today? I mean, the box office was pretty dead this weekend, right? I didn't look at the full report, but I imagine it was Tim Burton's Beetlejuice again. I don't think Speak No
Yep,
More really did too well.
I think it barely beat expectations, but
Oh,
not by
okay.
much, which is crazy to me, given that it became basically an internet meme. That anytime you went to a theater, you had to see the Speak No Evil trailer.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Maybe take a lesson, Universal. You don't need to bombard us with a trailer for something to make us go see it. It doesn't always work.
Well, yeah, especially when that trailer makes the movie look just like the remake that came before it. I saw the trailer and thought, why would I bother seeing this? I already saw the other one.
Hmm. We're
Uh,
rare in that, I think, though. I mean, do they even mention in the trailer that it's a remake of the Danish film? Right?
I don't remember.
It, yeah. I mean, that movie definitely got some kind of cult buzz, but it's certainly no kind of major international breakout or anything. So it feels entirely possible that the audience they were targeting were not people like us who would have already become aware of that kind of a film, but people who just think it's original.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
and then so Marshall's joining us this week because the fall film festivals have pretty much tidied up the first three. We still have New York Film Festival to come. But many of the films that will be shown at the festival have played one of these big three festivals, the big three being Telluride, Venice, and Toronto. And basically, we want to hear some thoughts from the ground and somebody who'd actually seen these films, as opposed to just us talking about them from the buzz that they have.
Well, that I can do, at least for some of the Venice titles. I'm looking forward to certainly catching up with some of the ones that have started premiering at Telluride and TIFF, as well as some of the Berlin, Cannes, and Locarno titles that'll be showing up at the New York Film Festival. I feel like I barely caught my breath getting back from Venice last week, and on Wednesday we start press screenings for NYFF. So no rest for the weary. It is a marathon run to sprint's pace. Fall festival season, not for the faint of heart and short of breath.
Well, before we get into our main topic, I want to let's start with some news of the departed voice actor and actor, the legendary James Earl Jones. He passed away since we last recorded, Evan, and certainly everybody is familiar with his voice, whether it be from
Hmm.
Lion King and Mufasa or Darth Vader from the Star Wars movies. Certainly, his voice was one that we'll remember for generations to come. I'll start with you, Evan. Did you like outside of his voice acting performances? Do you have a particular movie that you love of his that he was performing in?
Well, I mean, obviously, I love him as Darth Vader. He's so iconic and menacing. Uh, Even just doing the voice, but I really liked some of his like smaller roles. Like I was a kid who grew up watching The Sandlot a fair amount, and I
Yeah.
really liked him in that.
Ah, that was
As
mine. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I loved when you find out later that's his yard, that his dog, and he has such a great like story to tell about his career. And I liked him in Field of Dreams too. I thought he was good in that. Not very different kind of performance than some of the other ones we've seen him in, but I like him in that too.
Man loves a baseball movie.
Sure.
He does.
Mhm.
He's good in them.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to his, I believe his first film role was in Doctor Strangelove, a pretty small part, but makes a big impact, not only just from the voice, but kind of the physicality and the commitment that he brings to the very specific humorous tone that Kubrick brought to that satire. And just from the beginning, you could already tell that this was someone whose voice and presence and command that he brought anytime any portion of his screen presence was going to be featured, that he was going to be someone who you would always notice.
Yeah, for sure. I watched Doctor Strangelove recently, and he was a very even in a minor role was, as you mentioned, he has a very physical presence in the movie, and he's noticeable, and he is funny in the little bit that he's given to do.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny that you would mention Field of Dreams, Evan. Like that, I feel like my background on Kevin Costner movies is very poor. I think one of the games I like to play daily is this game online called Framed, where like you see some images and you try to
Yeah.
guess the movie. And recently they had like Dances with Wolves, and then even more recently they had Field of Dreams. And I was like saying to myself, "Wow, I've not seen either of these Kevin Costner movies." And I don't know, I was
Yeah.
talking to some family, and they're like, "How come you never saw these Kevin Costner's movies?" And I was like, "Because I was 4 when Dances with Wolves won Best Picture." So uh, that was not one that I was particularly invested in. And I don't have too many blind spots when it comes to Academy Award winning Best Picture winners. And of the last maybe like 30 or 40 years, that's up there with probably The English Patient as uh, the more recent ones that I haven't seen, because I pretty much checked off the checklist of all the other ones.
As a masochist who has watched all of the Best Picture winners across all, 96 years of the Academy Awards, I will advise you, for the sake of your sanity, keep a few blind spots. They have not picked all winners.
Oh, what? You didn't think Green Book was amazing?
Believe it or not, there are worse Best Picture winners than Green Book. Not many. I think there was maybe one in my ranking, the Broadway Melody, which is like the second Best Picture winner. It
Mm,
is unwatchable. Not to mention very problematic in its own way, like Green Book is.
Yeah, like the
good to know.
aforementioned two that I mentioned. I think the biggest one for me that is a blind spot that uh, soon I'll try to get off is the Deer Hunter.
Mhm.
That would be the one that probably shocks people the most when I mention the Best Picture winners that I haven't seen. Um,
I'm kind of
but yeah,
surprised, Max.
see, you're kind of
Do it
surprised.
for John Cazale. The
Yep.
the most immaculate run in cinema history.
Yeah.
Seriously.
But yeah, we are going to miss James Earl Jones, and certainly we'll always hear his voice in many of his roles. Uh, Certainly iconic in uh, modern pop culture society. Before we touch into Venice and Tiff, I wanted to put a bow on the summer movie bet, Evan, and we wrapped it up. Let's put it this way: like um, you were maybe hoping that Borderlands would do something, anything, and that it like left the
Yeah.
theater after $19 million. That was just a
Yeah.
Ouch.
total disaster.
It's rough.
I feel like Tar made more money than that, maybe.
um, but yeah, like we thought, Deadpool and Wolverine and Inside Out 2 ended up being the two biggest movies of the year, for
Mhm.
summer wise, and um, it checked out. I mean, maybe one of us could pick Inside Out 2 or Deadpool and Wolverine. They ended up both around 650 uh million, that is. And the other films kind of fell in line. I guess the bigger surprise was probably Twisters, right? That was the big surprise of the summer. that
Yeah.
almost hit 300 million, and you could have probably not predicted that movie was going to do that. Other than that, Bad Boys Ride or Die continued to be strong. That franchise continues to get butts and seats, almost $200 million. I guess that's a reason why the third film was the highest grossing movie of 2020. um, but yeah, I guess. Well, what lessons did you learn, Evan? Not to pick an A24 movie, right?
Right, yeah, not to pick Maxine.
Hmm.
That was a choice on my part. I thought in my head that those movies had done better than they actually did. That was a mistake. And also, I think that knowing that a video game adaptation is really a roll of the dice when it comes to things like Borderlands. It could be huge or it could be just abysmal. Like, I wish I had maybe like snagged like the Planet of the Apes movie in my picks because that seemed like it was one that performed pretty well for you, Max. Like you had several others that performed extremely well, but that was one that was like a really smart pick that I feel like rewarded you.
Yeah, it's funny. Like some of these movies, they hit like they were supposed to hit, like the expectations, like they were right in line with it. Of course, last summer that was kind of an anomaly when we had Barbenheimer, where uh, there was no comps for Barbie, and I remember former co-host John picked Barbie, and it was just like no one could have imagined that movie breaking out like it did. And then I ended up picking Oppenheimer, and same for like a 3 hour drama about the nuclear bomb. It's just no one predicted the box office for those. I feel this summer was a little bit easier to pick out. I know we said maybe 2 weeks ago the one that was the biggest winner probably was Neon's Long Legs, because again, a really low budget film, and became uh, a great box office winner for Neon, maybe their highest grossing film in their history. But yeah, now we're gonna move on to TIFF Venice talk. Bring Marshall into the fold here. We already knew the Venice winner, and that was Pedro Almodovar's The Room Next Door. We'll talk about that one. Thankfully, we have Marshall here to talk about it, and it won. Um, I think the Silver Lining winner for Best Director, Brady Corbett with The Brutalist. We'll also talk about that. And then today we got a reaction from the crowd here. This morning they announced the TIFF's People's Choice Awards. The big surprise was that The Life of Chuck has won the TIFF's People's Choice Awards. Usually, that is a ticket into the Best Picture realm, if you will.
Right.
Certainly for um, last year's TIFF People's Choice winner, that's what it meant. That one, of course, was the was it Jeffrey Wright starring movie?
American
Oh yeah.
Fiction.
Yeah,
Yep.
American Fiction.
Yeah, I saw a stat that said 12 of the last 14 People's Choice winners have gone on to be nominated for Best Picture. So those are pretty strong numbers.
Yeah. um, Here in Toronto, the runner-up was Emilia Perez, which has played just about every film festival. Did you get to see that one in Venice?
No, usually things that world premiere in Cannes do not go on to play Venice because they have a pretty similar policy of world premieres only.
Okay.
But I'm very shocked that this one seems to be having the legs that it does. I remember it seems like it's going to be a very divisive film, and I'm a little scared about the discourse that's going to be unlocked, especially because it's going to drop on Netflix.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the things that come out being the big takeaways are wildly inconsistent with what they want the conversation to be. And this usually happens for movies that are widely acclaimed. Like the fact that Marriage Story became such a meme from the fight scene to me is just wild. Um, I should probably acknowledge that I'm on the Know Your Meme page for that film, so I'm very much a part of the problem. But no, it seems like this is really going to go the distance, as is Honora for that matter. I am very pleased as a big fan of Sean Baker's, and I mean, the Florida Project demolished me like it did for many, many people. And I'm really sad that one didn't get more awards love, but I certainly think it's winning in the long game of being the kind of movie that people want to go back to, and it's usually at the top of people's A24 rankings. And I'm very pleased. Sean Baker is a very kind gentleman, inexplicably a Twitter mutual. He saw that when I was trying to watch his first movie, Takeout, to prepare for, I can't remember, it probably would have been the Florida Project. The version that was on Amazon Prime had no subtitles, and I was like, "Is this a artistic choice? And I'm not supposed to know what they're saying?" And I just kind of tweeted that out into the void, and lo and behold, I get a nice DM from him saying, "No, that's not how it's supposed to be. There should be subtitles. I'm going to raise that issue, but in the meantime, send me your address, and I will send you a copy of the movie."
Oh,
And
that's cool.
he very kindly did at his own expense, which is a very noble thing. So I'm rooting for him sight unseen with Honora, which really seems to be potentially running the Parasite playbook. David Ehrlich brought up today on Twitter that he's kind of feeling the same buzz building around it, which is very exciting.
Yeah, Nora won the second runner-up at TIFF, and of course is already the winner of the Palme d'Or earlier this year at the Cannes Film Festival. Evan, what do you feel about the People's Choice Awards? Do you have any thoughts or your personal history with the People's Choice Awards? I find it funny that we mentioned Green Book, which was a film that was championed from the TIFF's People's Choice Award.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I haven't really followed the festivals that closely prior to doing this show, so I don't have like a ton of reaction. But yeah, the Green Book was one I remember when I was reading earlier. It just was fresh in my mind. I did not have Life of Chuck at all on my radar, so I literally know nothing about it other than it's Tom Hiddleston and a Stephen King, but and Mike Flanagan doing Stephen King, but not horror. So that's interesting, I guess. Um, I know I'm definitely anxious to see Anora though. It just sounds really interesting. And Marshall, I'd heard a similar story from a colleague of ours in Bafka, Greg Vellante, about Sean Baker sending him copies of his early films because he was just interested in wanting to see them. And I just think that's so cool of him to do that. That's awesome that he did that for you.
Yeah, good guy. Um, yeah, I'm pulling up the TIFF People's Choice Awards, and I'm seeing a lot of these are. I mean, obviously, People's Choice implies crowd pleaser to some extent,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I think sometimes the Toronto audience does react to very starry, very buzzy titles. I think, for example, The Fablemans won in 2022, which I really love that movie. I think it's a very deserving winner. But they made a whole big fuss about it. It was Spielberg's first time coming to Toronto, and they really eventized that film screening there. And many people thought that Universal took it there for the purpose of winning the People's Choice Award. And from what I heard about the way that the screening went over from people who were in TIFF, I mean, Mark Hamill came out, Stephen King came out. Hiddleston obviously has a very strong online, very motivated fan base. So it had a lot of elements, I think, that would work in its favor to win an award like this. I think, especially given that a lot of the big premieres on the fall circuit are not quite hitting as people were expecting, at least in terms of kind of the most hotly tipped Oscar titles. I think the ones that are starting to rise to the top are a little bit more unexpected or don't necessarily come in with a really obvious pedigree, which is something I think we'll probably get into as we talk about the things that I saw in Venice that were hitting and the things that just didn't quite seem to land in the way that their distributors or filmmaking teams intended them to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, just talking about Amelia Perez, right? Marshall, is that Amelia Perez is being shepherded around by Netflix, and the piano teacher, or the piano lesson rather, that was shown at TIFF and premiered at Telluride, and it just kind of has like muted buzz. Like, I haven't heard like people super excited about that, and it looks like, oh well, this, maybe they'll redirect and like really just focus on Amelia Perez and put their marketing uh, potential into that. Um,
Which is kind of crazy to me. Like I have deliberately avoided knowing too much about Amelia Perez because I hear it's just so bonkers. But like the log line is a Mexican cartel leader gets a sex assignment surgery to avoid getting captured. Like that is a bananas thing for them to be
Yeah,
spending what's
seriously.
probably going to be like tens of millions of dollars. And the Academy's changed, but I don't know if it's changed that much.
Yeah, and
But who knows?
I've heard it's
They
like a musical, like part of it.
Yes, and like it's got Selena Gomez, who that is no shade. I mean, she's been doing good work since Spring Breakers. My goodness, but that's going to bring a certain star quality and probably bring the attention of people who I'm going to guess probably haven't seen too many Jacques Audiard films. But that's just my guess. If they
Yeah.
go watch a Prophet, all the Selenators, however you pronounce her fan base, that's a win. I'll take it.
All right. And then like I saw like some other stuff going down. The documentary award went to The Tragically Hip No Dress Rehearsal. I think the runner up went to Will and Harper, which is a movie that I was able to see recently thanks to a screener from Netflix. And the Midnight Madness winner is The Substance, the movie release that's going to be coming to theaters pretty soon. I'm sure they're overjoyed with the buzz that the movie's getting, and when they release it in theaters.
Again, though, I a part of me does wonder if that's going to be the Demi Moore of it all and the celebrity and the substance. Because I will give credit to Midnight Madness. I think that is one of the best curated film festival sections there is out there, and kudos to Peter Kaplowski, who always manages to program things that are really unexpected. Doesn't often or doesn't give his section entirely over to just buzzy horror titles that have big stars attached. Like he really goes and finds international gems and champions filmmakers who are not particularly well known and gives them the platform to grow their careers. So maybe I just say this as someone who was very mixed on the substance.
No, I'm glad you could bring your opinion to it. I know they also showed the Hugh Grant movie, The Heretic, at TIFF, and I think that one did not play midnight, but it was just part of the festival, and people were saying, "Oh, that's a pretty neat horror movie." But um, yeah,
From
that's
the
neither.
guys who brought you the 65 million or whatever the Adam Driver dinosaur movie.
um, All right, so let's go to the Venice recap, and for fun, and because Evan hasn't been able to talking too much, I'm gonna have Evan give from his perspective the questions that he wants to ask Marshall about
Oh,
what it's like in Venice and what have you. So why don't you take over, Evan?
sure. Yeah. So, Marshall, how many times have you been to Venice for the film festival?
This is my third time, non-consecutive. I started going after COVID. It was kind of the last big film festival on my bucket list, and it's now become my favorite. And as much as I can, I would love to make it an annual tradition, both in terms of I think the community there is really great. The festival pace is unmatched in terms of it's scheduled in a really nice way to watch movies, right in a decent amount of time, not under the gun for immediate embargo lifts. And then you're also just in Italy and you can eat good food. And you can go to the beach. And those things are very, very nice.
Do you have to take a boat to every screening?
If you stay on the mainland, which I do, yes. But the nice thing is they do give you basically like a free pass to take that free of charge. Uh, so you do have to budget some time in. It does
Mhm.
involve getting up pretty early just to keep myself at ease, to make sure that I don't miss anything and bungle an assignment. There was one year in 2022 when all the Timothy Chalamet stands were trying to get over to see Bones and all, and I missed my screening because I slept in a little bit, and that was not fun.
Oh no.
But
That
that
sounds
sounds.
rough.
And it also sounds like
Yeah.
so to use the word lightly, maybe majestic. That you're like taking a boat to go see a movie, right? It's
Oh yes.
like
No, it is very much like first world problems. Like, oh no, this boat on this beautiful waterway in Italy is running late because there are other people who also want to see movies. How dare they?
I mean, I liked hearing though that their scheduling is arranged very nicely because that is a problem covering film festivals is feeling like
Oh
under the
yeah.
gun. Or Max and I were talking about this. Was it last show, Max, where we were just saying like when you're you're sitting there like planning out your schedule and thinking like, okay, what are some of the shortest things I can see that allow me to
Mhm.
see more things, and when can I like shuffle those around to somehow like maximize the amount I can see without feeling just utterly exhausted.
Right. And the nice thing too is Venice operates on they screen for press badge for people with press badges. They usually screen them or the titles I would say 24-ish hours or so before the actual embargo lifts. So one you can form a much more nuanced take with a little bit more time. You're also not sitting there thinking like, okay, what's the tweet? What do I need to send the moment I get out of here to like mark my territory on this movie? So I think you see much less hyperbole coming out of Venice than I think you do out of something like a Telluride or a TIFF. No shade to those people, but some of the tweets that come out of there, I'm like, everything you see is not a masterpiece. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Although I will say there was one film at Venice that did get a lot of M word chatter, and I don't think it was entirely undeserved. So maybe I shouldn't be casting or throwing stones from my glass house.
Right. I mean, like everybody's quick to announce some things. I mean, I remember being on the beach, first world problems, and I was looking on my phone. I was like looking at the reactions out to Alfonso Cuarón's Roma when that came out and played in Venice, and I was just like, "Oh, this thing sounds like the greatest thing since sliced bread. I can't wait to see it." And I did end up loving it, but I mean, like, yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the filmness of it all.
Well, and I also think that unreasonable expectations are rarely a good thing for any movie. I think it's always best to go in my opinion, with relatively little knowledge. Obviously, the fact that something's been selected to compete at something like a Venice Film Festival is probably going to assure you a certain level of quality and confer a certain level of expectation on it. But to think that, oh, this could be the greatest thing ever seen or the best movie of the year is rarely helpful and only sets you up for disappointment.
Well, I feel like that brings me to my next question. What's the worst movie that you've seen at Venice? Could be this year or one of your trips. Like, what's the one you're like, oh god, that was just
Oh,
abysmal.
gosh, I have to think back to previous years. If there's anything as bad as Baby Invasion, the new Harmony Korine, I'm doing scare quotes, film. Uh,
Oh, oh
it
no,
is
Harmony Korine.
I say this as someone who is a massive Spring Breakers ride or die. I think that movie is absolutely brilliant and like a defining movie of millennial life. But whatever he's doing in this whole edgelord phase is really earning the name because it is just a lot of provocation, a lot of needling the powers that be within cinema to be less boring according to his wildly warped standard of whatever that word means. This one is an even weirder and less successful experiment than Aggro Drift last year, which also generated a certain amount of eye rolling, consternation, shock, terror, you name it, from film festival attendees. This one is meant to emulate a video game that is basically spun off from its developer gone out on the dark web, and it's a first person shooter game where you're really watching it from the perspective of someone in that mindset
Hmm.
playing the game. But there's like an AR feature that turns your kind of fellow shooting squadron their faces into babies. So you're watching babies go kind of do like eat the rich cosplay. It is you get the point within about 5 minutes, and even at
Mm.
80 minutes long, which is not a long movie, you're just drubbed by the monotony of it. And if Harmony Korine thinks that he is beating boredom with this, I think he is doing some of the most boring and repetitive and just not particularly interesting work, certainly at this year's festival. So I was very disappointed, and I don't think it helped that the way that they scheduled the screenings made it very hard to get access, and it took up way more of my time and mental energy than I would have liked.
That sounds brutal.
Not my favorite. Don't
Yikes.
recommend.
Well, what about some of the stuff that you saw this year that you would recommend, that you did like?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the ones that we're going to talk about, um, not necessarily the ones that I came in expecting to be my favorites. Although certainly, I think if you kind of were to do a straw poll of people on the ground in Venice, what their favorite movie at the festival was, I'd probably align with my own, which is Brady Corbett's The Brutalist. As Max mentioned, I believe he won the Best Director prize at the festival, incredibly deserved. This is the movie that I was teasing that many people were throwing around the word masterpiece. I don't think I'm quite there on first viewing. I do think it has a little bit of it has a few rough edges, but nothing that is particularly concerning. I think it's a really impressive piece of filmmaking. To give a little bit of background on the subject of the film, it's about a Jewish Hungarian immigrant to America who was an architect in Europe and comes over and falls into the good-ish graces of a family in Pennsylvania that has a sort of aristocratic background, and they end up contracting him to build this giant community center that's meant to be very much the anchor of a small town in post-war America, and it becomes this really potent meditation on the American dream and the American character, who has access to it, who has to fight for their vision, who has the benefit of the doubt. But it raises these questions in really organic, fascinating, non-pushy ways. And it certainly has the grace to do that over the course of its 3.5 hour running time, which for anyone who's already clutching their bladder, it does have a 15-minute intermission, which is very nice. I appreciate that. But the thing moves like a precision machine. I very consciously dimmed my watch to make sure that I wasn't looking down at it and trying to track the time. And I just kind of happened to lift my watch face at one point in the middle of the movie, assuming that maybe an hour had passed, and it was nearly the 2 hour mark. You do not feel the length of 3.5 hours at all because it is so compelling. It's really working in kind of the great American novel style of really declarative storytelling about the country and its character. The closest comparison I can provide, I think a lot of people are throwing around Paul Thomas Anderson with something like a There Will Be Blood or The Master. To me, it also reminds me a lot of the work of James Gray, a filmmaker who I really love and I don't think gets the respect he deserves. Things like The Immigrant, We Own the Night, even Armageddon Time, which is a little bit more compact in terms of its scope, that came out 2 years ago. It's just very sincere and very old school in not only just its setting, but in the acting style, in its general tone. It feels very refreshingly free of irony. And now that A24 has picked this up, it certainly seems like they're going to position this as their big awards horse of the year. I think they maybe thought they were going to have that with Luca Guadagnino's Queer, which premiered to, I would say, a little bit of mixed responses on the Lido. I think people just were not entirely sure what to make of it, myself included. I did like that film, but it's certainly not something I would recommend trying to come to your critical consensus on in 2 hours, which is how long I had to write my review online. But all that to be said, yeah, The Brutalist is, I think, even though it did not come away with the Golden Lion, I would consider that the real winner of Venice in my book.
So Marshall, like, now just to say, like, on the ground at TIFF,
Mhm.
I heard like the P&I screening for The Brutalist was like, people were lined up 2 hours early, and
Mhm.
like a lot of people were shut out. It was a big hit of people wanting to see it again.
Mhm.
The 70 millimeter format. I guess
Mhm.
people going to New York Film Festival, they're showing it on 35 and 70, and people were just dying
Mhm.
to see it on 70. But
Yeah, it looks beautiful. The print was gorgeous. It was shot on VistaVision and has the kind of the fun logo at the beginning, which is cool to see. Although I believe it was only shot on 35 millimeter and blown up to 70 millimeter. There's the film stock snobs are going to let us
yeah.
know all about this on Twitter, I'm sure.
Now, this is a pretty low budget, for this type of movie, right? This type of epic scope. I think
Hmm.
A24 ended up paying what, 10 million for it.
Hmm.
It's it's a probably the small miracle, and any film is
Mhm.
getting made is a miracle, but it's a
Mhm.
particularly a strong miracle that maybe this one came across the finish line the way it did.
Yeah, I think I read that it was actually made for about $10 million. So, I mean, I'm glad that everyone involved is getting, getting their cost recouped. I think it. I cannot imagine this was an easy sell. 3.5 hour long epic film that insisted on being shot in, a very expensive film stock.
Now, it should we expect? Is it just like more of a personal drama, like those Paul Thomas Anderson movies? We shouldn't expect anything epic like Lawrence of Arabia or Seven Samurai with epic battles, right?
No, no, no. All very intimate drama, but blown up on a really impressively large scale, and it's a multi generational story. The main action spans, I would say, probably like 15 years or so, enough to like where you really feel the weight of time passing. And I appreciate that Brady Corbett gives us the space to sit with the consequence of actions, not just a rapid succession of plot points.
And in Venice, were there many April spritzes had?
Oh, many. Although the lines were very long this year, if I have any complaint about the festival, which again, first world
Yeah.
problems, it was very hot and humid, and it made the lines for refreshments very long, even to sometimes to fill up your water bottle at the little fountains. Just everything took a little bit longer, and probably made people a little bit grumpier. Maybe you saw some of that in the reviews, which I don't think there was quite as many, or there were quite as many titles that really had the same amount of rapturous buzz and critical consensus that the Brutalist built.
But one of the ones that seemed to do really well for itself was the Nicole Kidman vehicle, Babygirl, and
Yes.
she ended up winning an award for her performance at Venice. And unfortunately, she wasn't there to accept it. Her mother had passed away during that time, and what a tragedy because
Hmm.
it's like one of your most acclaimed roles. I've heard that. It played well in Toronto as well. So, can you tell us a little bit about Babygirl and Nicole Kidman?
Yes. So in Baby Girl, which is the follow up to Dutch director Helena Ryan's film Bodies, 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 which I did not care for very much. And so I approached this one with a little bit of trepidation. And I found that the issues that I had with Bodies, Bodies, Bodies being what I like to call like Gen Z social justice Mad Libs, uh, it's the complete opposite of that. And I think maybe that has something to do with the fact that Ryan wrote the film herself. This is a erotic thriller of sorts. Although in my review, which you can find on Slant Magazine, I compared it a little bit to a screwball comedy. It is about Kidman's CEO type, Romy, who runs a company and is in basically a very passionless marriage. It's pointed out that her husband has not brought her to climax over the course of their marriage, which is certainly something. And it leaves her
Yes, it
very,
is.
yes, it leaves her very open to a type of infatuation for one of her employees, who happens to be an intern, played by the very strapping Harris Dickinson, and they have an encounter. He is very forward about the feelings that he has and the intention, and she resists at first, but then falls into this mutual affair that goes on, and it becomes very much about not so much the act itself, but the conversations they have about sex and pleasure and consent, and it's all handled in a way that is, I think, a little bit less afraid of saying the right thing or feeling like it has to provide a model of what this type of behavior should be. I think it is very open and refreshingly frank about the fact that these conversations are hard, especially whenever there are imbalances of gender, of age, of class, of social status, what have you. Um, and Kidman just really gives her all to it. Gosh, please don't let me be the person who calls it like brave that she. Yeah, but it's her work is really fearless. You don't feel like she's doing like the nudity clause version of the film, where she's just thinking about protecting herself. She's very emotionally raw and vulnerable, and I think the connection that you feel between her and Harris Dickinson, and the way that they're finding pleasure together and making it a conversation and something that's meant to be mutual, not just something that's forced upon someone else, and that can sometimes create an imbalance. It's really fantastic. I was lucky enough to go to the premiere, where it was greeted with a 7 minute standing ovation, according to the people who whipped up the clock. I did not. Please let us abandon, horse race journalism for film festival standing ovations. Although the longest one did end up winning the Golden Lion, being the room next door. So who knows? Maybe the crowds at these premieres are onto something after all, and I'm just cranky.
Marshall, it's funny. Did you happen to see the memes that were going around where people were like, "Oh, I just watched something in my living room and gave
Uh
it
huh.
like 10 minutes"?
Yep. Uh huh. Uh, there's also a good meme, something along the lines of a heist film that takes place during a standing ovation at Cannes. Like, someone should make that movie. I think it would be really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is. I think the subject matter will make it a tougher sell for, say, awards. Although I certainly think Nicole Kidman's going to be in the conversation for Best Actress, and uh, she gives what I think is the best female lead performance of the year thus far. And I'm really eager for people to see this one, for the conversations to happen about it. Uh, I hope that it will be handled in a way that is not the most like reductive age gap kind of thing. Like heaven forbid if we're doing the licorice pizza pedophilia discourse again, I'm going to jump off my balcony.
Uh,
I mean,
woof.
he's of age, so at least we're good there. But someone's going to find an issue, and my hope is that the dumbest people do not define the conversation around this film that is very nuanced around a subject that I think is deserving of a much more interesting and detailed conversation than the one that I think that we try to have about it.
So, but Marshall, this wasn't just like a movie where like it's an older woman with a younger guy, and they're like exploring that, right? Because we had a film 2 years ago, which I kind of enjoyed, the Good Luck to You, Leo Grand,
Hmm.
and that was with Emma Thompson,
Hmm.
and really about a woman exploring her sexuality later in life and giving
Hmm.
herself over to that. You would say like it's a different film than that, or a different direction.
Definitely. Well, in Leo Grand, he's a sex worker,
Yeah.
and this is
Mhm.
yeah. This is there's no money being exchanged for the services. It's a relationship that they enter into mutually based on a shared attraction, each kind of fighting it in their own way, but ultimately, getting to a place of I would say first the sexual and then the sentimental. And I should mention too that Nicole Kidman's husband in the film is played by Antonio Banderas. So naturally, he's not just gonna sit there quietly and just let this all happen, or just kind of be someone the movie ignores. You don't cast someone of that caliber for things to not spill over in a way that allows Antonio Banderas to be dramatic.
No, it's funny. Like of all people to say, like a man who hasn't given her an orgasm, right? It's Antonio Banderas.
Right. Uh,
uh,
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah,
that's certainly something. And not the first movie this year with Nicole Kidman having, an affair with a younger man. We had a
right.
family affair
oh,
come out this year as well.
she has a lot of these roles. I mean, even going back to Birth 20 years ago, um, and The Family Affair was not even the first time she's been romantically linked with Zac Efron on screen. Shout out to anyone who remembers The Paperboy and her infamous Golden Shower, whenever Academy Award winning actress Nicole Kidman has to deliver the line, "No one is going to pee on him but me."
Man,
I
that's
may be paraphrasing. Don't come at me if I didn't get the quote right.
So it's funny we mentioned Antonio Banderas because he had frequently worked with director Pedro Almodovar, and Almodovar is the man who directed The Room Next Door. I think this is his first big festival when he has been, I guess, if you want to say like a late period run lately. His movies have been really well received. Pain and Glory and Parallel Mothers have really pleased audiences and continued his flair for what he's known for. Uh, I think maybe a few years ago, I started like watching just like almost everything he did. I remember going back and watching Voltaire and Woman on the e- Edge of a Nervous Breakdown, and really loving All About My Mother. I think that's my favorite of his. So I was very eager to hear about his English language debut at The Room Next Door, and even more excited to hear that it received such high honors. Marshall, you saw this one at Venice. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's his first film in the English language. That's something he's been building up towards with some of these short films with Tilda Swinton, who does appear in The Room Next Door, and then last year's very bizarre neo-western with Pedro Pascal and Ethan Hawke. Um, I think some of what people worried about with those films that the English just didn't quite have the same level of passion that you can tell is in the dialogue, even if you don't speak Spanish. The way that the performers are delivering them and the way that it just feels like it has a certain zest to it
Mm-hmm.
that would kind of match, say, his extravagant production design or the really expressive costumes. It just isn't quite there in The Room Next Door, which was a little bit of a disappointment to me. But I think it does also match the subject matter of the film. Uh, as mentioned, Tilda Swinton's in this. She plays a former war correspondent who has been stricken with cancer, and she reconnects with an author friend of hers, played by Julianne Moore, who was not particularly a close friend. I would say she's probably drifting a little bit more into acquaintance territory whenever these two women meet up at the beginning of the film. But as Swinton's character gets a terminal diagnosis, she's come to the decision that she would rather not submit to another round of treatment, chemotherapy, and has procured a pill that will essentially provide for euthanasia, not legal in New York, where she resides. So what she asks of her friend and makes this proposal to accompany her upstate in New York, where she will administer the pill to herself. But what she wants is to know that she is just not dying alone, that there is a friend in, wait for it, the room next door.
Oh,
Uh,
see what they did
yes.
there.
Yes.
Yep. You laugh. No laughing matter in this film. Although there is a little bit of humor here and there. There's some dark humor. And yeah, Max, you mentioned this being somewhat of a late period Almodovar film. I think certainly given the subject matter, Pain and Glory was also very reflective on his own mortality in a way that did feel a little bit different, given that he is a filmmaker I would associate more with light and subversiveness and kind of reveling in breaking taboos. And there is some element of that in The Room Next Door. I think he's thinking about breaking the taboo that we have around death. Uh, Swinton has a really powerful monologue in the film where she breaks down what she describes as the ways in which our society describes cancer as something of a battle between the person and the disease, and the ultimate outcome, whether you win, you beat the cancer, or you lose your battle, would seem to imply that you have a sense of agency in how these things go. And she wants to kind of burst the taboo of saying, I don't see this as a fight. I see it as this is the natural course that my body is going in. And rather than fighting it or trying to resist that, I would rather just enter into this next stage of whatever awaits me peacefully. Um, and I think another thing that ties it to some of those Almodovar films, the classics that you were mentioning, Max, that you've been catching up with, uh, he's such a great director of women and a great appreciator of the bonds that these women share. And I think part of why I think Parallel Mothers to me is the best thing that he's made in quite some time is that I think it takes those bonds and the sisterhood that forms between women in tough circumstances, sometimes whenever the men are just disconnected from the day-to-day problems and the operations of life, the sisterhood that forms in those circumstances, And in many ways, The Room Next Door is that. It's about a sisterhood between these two women reforming around death and giving them life and vitality to their relationship once more. Um, do I think this is the film that, let's say, as you mentioned, he's been a mainstay on the festival circuit for many decades now. I think most people would consider him probably, if not the greatest Spanish filmmaker of all time, certainly the greatest living one. And it does feel a little weird that this is going to be probably the one major film festival award that he wins for. Something that's a little bit more low key, something that's not quite in keeping with his overall style. But then again, you think like Martin Scorsese's Best Pictures for The Departed, a movie I
Right.
love, but many people are, many people would say that's not up there with A Taxi Driver or Raging Bull or Goodfellas or what have you.
Would you say that, Evan, is The Departed up there with, with those movies, being a fellow Boston?
Oh, hell no.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I love
Microprocessors.
Scorsese. I love Scorsese, but it is not one of his stronger movies, and I just can't believe of everything that one won an Academy Award. Yikes.
Yeah,
I
I
love
think
that movie. I'll fight for it, but
I think
Oh, I
that year.
I,
enjoy
I'm
it.
I, I'm not gonna dispute anyone who wants to make the argument that it's not up there with his greatest of all time.
Well, I think that year that it won was particularly weak, where like the closest challenger was Little Miss Sunshine, and that's not
Uh-huh.
some bastion of American classic. So,
Exactly. Or there was also an Inarritu film that year before they decided they were just going to give him an Oscar for everything.
but yeah, those were some of the buzziest titles, certainly at the festival. I forget if Baby Girl's going to play New York, but I know the Brutalist and the Room
Mhm.
Next Door is going to be there.
Yeah, Baby Girl's not playing New York. I'm not entirely sure what the festival journey is for that film uh, after the big ones. I assume it'll probably play like AFI because everything plays AFI, it seems. Um, I bet they'll probably tour it around some smaller regional festivals and kind of try to build buzz organically. I do think it could be a decent box office player at the end of the year. They're putting it at Christmas, which is quite the gamble, especially given how many high profile titles there are this year. But I could certainly see it being a little bit of a breakout success for them, especially with Kidman able to promote it.
Yeah, and one film that we won't get to talk about, which I was talking to Evan before we came on, was that the animated film The Wild Robot
Oh, yeah.
did big word of mouth out of TIFF. It had a lot of screenings. People are really high on that film. I had watched that director's one of his previous films in How to Train Your Dragon with my daughter, and I remembered how much I liked that movie, and of course he co-directed Lilo and Stitch as well.
Hmm.
So some great animated features. I saw like I think a Variety article was buzzing so much like in a weak year could the Wild Robot be like the next animated movie nominated for Best Picture? We'll see.
Wow.
We'll see about that. I mean, I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm
Yeah.
excited to.
I mean, first it's got a that membership body always defaults to voting for the Pixar movie, so
Right.
I worry. I was not the biggest fan of Inside Out 2. Maybe that's just because I think Inside Out, the first one, is just a masterpiece. But, it's going to be hard to say no to the highest grossing movie of the year.
Yeah, the Pixar's highest grossing movie ever.
Hmm. So we'll see. It'll be interesting, at least. A category which I feel like normally you just kind of what's coming and you check it off and it's like, okay, there we go.
Yeah. So I want to open it up to you, Marshall, to give us maybe a brief rundown of some other titles that you might have enjoyed, or if people are able to see them at local fest, or by the end of the year that you know, maybe didn't have the buzz of these three that we mentioned that
Hmm.
people should still check out.
Certainly. I think the biggest thing that we haven't mentioned that I really loved was Alex Ross Perry's Pavements. His very unconventional, idiosyncratic hybrid film about the band Pavement with Stephen Malkmus. If you have heard this name, maybe it's just because you have seen the deep programming in Barbie. Whenever he gets an inexplicable shout out there, it is brought up in the film, which is great. But if you are someone who does not care for musical biopics in the vein of, let's say, Bohemian Rhapsody, where it feels like they've just dramatized a Wikipedia page, this is very much a movie for you. Rather than either doing kind of a standard documentary style film on their reunion tour or doing kind of a fictionalized version that just kind of plays the hits, it is very unique and unconventional tribute to the kind of fandom that a cult alt rock band would inspire. So not only is there kind of this new footage being shot of the band's reunion tour, there is also three separate projects that Alex Ross Perry has mounted over the course of several years. There is a fake biopic that is very much mocking the kind of self seriousness that that filmmakers and actors in particular bring to trying to dramatize the life of real people. Joe Keery plays kind of the frontman Stephen Malkmus, and it is like the most brutal takedown of like a certain style of really self-serious acting. I think there are probably several jabs at Austin Butler for the Elvis stuff with the accent work that just went over like gangbusters in the screening. So that's like the most obvious thing that he's doing. But there's also he does like an off-Broadway musical
Oh.
with pavement songs, which he points out that I want to try and take this band that has incredibly ironic lyrics and a very kind of alternative ethos and put it into musical theater, which is arguably the most sincere art form that we have, and kind of watch that interplay. And then he also creates a fake pavement museum that is kind of self mythologizing the band in a really needling way. And it's all woven together by the editor Robert Greene, who many people will know from his works like Kate Plays Christine or Procession on Netflix from a few years back. So it's always shape shifting before your eyes. And for someone who, or if you're someone who just doesn't really care for a by the numbers biopic, this is going to really tickle your fancy in a really exciting way. And it's playing New York Film Festival. I'm sure it will probably do a pretty robust festival tour. And Utopia, the new kind of upstart distributor, acquired this one, and I think that they will do some interesting things to get it seen. I really just appreciate any movie that is willing to interrogate a form and demolish a bunch of cliches like Alex Ross Perry does. So, if there's anything that I would love to put on people's radars that might not necessarily be competing for awards or really high profile stuff, this is that.
Evan, did you have anything else that you would like to ask Marshall before we move on?
No, but the movies you talked about all sound really interesting. And on my other podcast, we would say you spoiler pieced me into wanting to see them.
All right, wonderful. So, we're before we get to the what you've been watching section, we're gonna throw it to doing some show call outs, and here you can find the podcast on X and well Twitter somewhat is at It's the Pick Pod. You can find us also at Blue Sky. I've been running some boosting campaigns over on Instagram. If you've checked those out recently, I've activated that account a little bit more. You can always email us if you want to reach out to us at itsthepictures@gmail.com. You can find me at Blue Sky most of the time. It's thepictures.substack.com. I'm there under Max Colville, or you can find me on X at MH Colville. Evan, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Blue Sky, and Threads as Real Recon. And then over at Spoiler Piece Theater, which is the other podcast I do, which you can just get wherever you get podcasts.
And Marshall, where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is through my Substack newsletter, Marshall, Marshall, and the movies. and there you can get links to all the various freelance work that I do. I rounded up everything I wrote about Venice in a post. So if you want to read more detailed thoughts that have been overseen by an editor and not just me rambling, you can read those there. I'm also on Twitter/X as media_Marshall.
All right, awesome. And on the Substack, I recently talked about some Netflix movies coming out this fall season. One movie that we didn't bother talking about was Maria, which got picked up by Netflix. That's to be decided on when they're going to be showing that on the platform. But other movies like His Three Daughters and Will and Harper are going to be coming on the platform very soon. And yeah, on the newsletter, I just did a write up on both of those movies. Um, Evan, I feel like we haven't heard from you very much tonight. Can you tell us what you've been watching?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I changed my mind about what I was going to talk about. Um, well, it's just because we were talking about Nicole Kidman earlier. I watched the Netflix show The Perfect Couple with Nicole Kidman.
Oh,
Um, which is like it's a whodunit. It's about this wedding that's going to happen in Nantucket, and there's this wealthy family. Nicole Kidman's the matriarch. Liev Schreiber is the father, and there's a few other people in it, like Eve Hewson is in it, and she's marrying into the family, and her best friend turns up dead, and it's just about like who done it, and just kind of dissecting, uh, the different relationships and dynamics within this like ultra wealthy family, the elements of class, and being someone who's kind of an outsider, and it's fun. It's not like anything too crazy in terms of like it's not going to be like mind blowing, but it is just I enjoyed it quite a bit. And its opening features a choreographed dance number with
I
all
was
the
going to
cast
say,
members.
there was no way you were going to get away with not mentioning the dance number. That thing
Oh, it's
is
great.
insane.
Yeah, and it has literally
Complimentary, to
nothing
be
to do with the
clear.
plot.
Yep.
Like, not at
And
all.
didn't they fight for it to be at the opening of every single episode? Like, no, no, no.
Yes.
Like, we did this. We put in the time. You're going to show it every episode.
And I'm pretty sure they did in every single episode, because remember watching it and thinking, well, this is weird that has nothing to do with the plot, but I kind of love it. I kind of love this group choreographed dance number on the beach.
They're all so into it, which makes it really fun.
Oh, totally. Like at
Shut
the
up.
end, like you can like hear them like clapping and cheering, and it feels genuine. Like they're all like, "Yeah, good job, everybody, we did it."
Hmm.
no, that's
So
funny because like that show has been like been trending and what have you. Just mainly what I knew about was the dance sequence, not much about the show itself. So thank you for sharing, Evan, what the show is actually about.
yeah, it's fun. Nicole
Like
Kidman's great.
they have the ever who done it, of course. Only Murders in the Building is currently back for its fourth season. I remember I watched maybe a few episodes of the first season, but I know people who are big fans of that. And from what it looks like to me now, from an outsider, it looks like almost every celebrity we can get is going to show up for a cameo. Not unlike The Bear, which we were talking about before we started this podcast, but it certainly seems like Only Murders in the Building is definitely towards that already. Like, oh, here's this kind of famous actor, I guess for me, I've been watching a few different things. The aforementioned two Netflix movies. I also watched Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies for the first time and absolutely loved that. I was pretty much prepping for seeing Hard Truths sometime, his new feature that premiered at TIFF, and that got some good word of mouth coming out of the festival. But I really love Secrets and Lies. But I wanted to talk about Tim Burton's Beetlejuice because we did our podcast on Tim Burton films for our last episode and kind of
Mhm.
circling around with it. Of course, this takes place, well, I guess the current age, if you will. Lydia is all grown up and she has a daughter of her own, Astrid, who's played by Jenny Ortega, and I don't know. The movie is kind of like four different plots in one, but there's one plot where Jenny Ortega's character befriends a young man in her neighborhood, and the young man isn't all that he seems to be. There's another subplot, I guess, where they have Monica Bellucci as like Beetlejuice's ex-wife, and she floats around the movie for like
Oh my god.
inexplicably for like half of it. Um,
Yeah, there's
is
like inexplicably 30 minutes though where she just disappears. Like, wait, where did Monica Bellucci go? Isn't she the main antagonist in this movie?
nope,
Guess not.
nope. No, she they say that she's a soul sucker, and they bring in Tim Burton's longtime collaborator Danny DeVito for like a cameo role. Um, where he gets annihilated, and then they have this other part of it where Lydia, again played by Winona Ryder, is currently um, on a TV show where she's speaking with the dead for a living, and her fiance, well, not fiance at the beginning of the movie, but her boyfriend desperately wants to get married, and he has these big dreams of like having the wedding on like Halloween and what have you. I don't know, Evan, and by extension, Marshall, because Marshall, I know you saw the world premiere at Venice when it played at the festival, but I maybe I wasn't the right person to ask about whether I liked this film, because some people are like, "Oh, did you like the new one?" And I was like, "Not really." They're like, "Oh, but do you like the first one?" I was like, "Not really." so, so I'm like, maybe I wasn't the right guy to ask about whether or not I liked it. Um, I think my favorite part comes like near the end of the film. There's like this musical number. Again, those are probably the stronger parts of the original Beetlejuice for me, or at least the most memorable, where they have musical numbers. So maybe that's no surprise. Um, I don't. Evan, did you get a chance to see this?
No, I haven't seen it yet. I've heard that if you like the first one a lot, you'll probably have fun with this, but I also have heard that it is way too busy in terms of the number of subplots that it tries to cram into the movie.
Mhm.
So I'm not surprised to hear that that wasn't working for you.
When Marshall, I read your review out of Venice, and I was like, "Oh, my buddy Marshall, he gave it like a passing grade. It's not going to be a total train wreck. I guess I can go see this and have a good weekend."
Well, it didn't sound like you thought it was a total train wreck, even if
No,
it wasn't your favorite.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's certainly
it's
not a train wreck. It's a nice way to spend an hour and a half, but
exactly. I think a lot of us in Venice were very skeptical about it being chosen as the opening night film. And so I would say our expectations are probably a little bit lower, and I think maybe some of the positive reviews elevated those to a level, as I was saying earlier, that might not have been the most conducive to really enjoying it. I don't know. Who would have thought that of the Warner Brothers titles that would play, and I'm going to drop the mention, even though you said to avoid it, that Beetlejuice probably came out of that festival stronger than Joker Folie à Deux.
yeah, definitely. I think Warner Brothers is going to pivot and just focus on Dune Part Two for
Oh, I
their
thought you were going to say Beetlejuice.
no.
Beetlejuice.
No, I don't think there's anything there. And actually, Marshall, is funny when I saw this. It might have been a tweet or a post or something where someone was like, "Oh, a large percentage of the audience came out because they wanted to see Winona Ryder and Jenny Ortega, not necessarily Michael Keaton in the role that maybe made his career."
Mhm. Open the schools.
So, Marshall, have you actually seen anything else that you would like to talk about?
Yes, I have, although most of my diet has been film festival related titles. I had the very great experience this past week to attend an event in Brooklyn with the Alamo Drafthouse Theater. They had just added a bunch of new auditoriums, and they rededicated the space to now. It is now the Spike Lee Cinema. The man himself was there to, uncork the champagne, and they showed Crooklyn, which is a film of his I hadn't seen. Though people had always talked it up to me, so I was very eager to get a chance to watch it and on the big screen at that. And I was blown away. I think the people who like this movie have seriously been underselling it. For those who might not be familiar, it's basically just kind of a portrait of his own childhood with a lot of autobiographical elements from his own growing up in kind of mid-century Brooklyn, I guess, like, 60s, 70s. I believe they said it's set in 1972. But he co-wrote it with two of his siblings, and the siblings were also on hand to do a Q&A, which basically just became them telling him a bunch of stories about their childhood. And you could see the ways in which kind of the love that they had both for each other, for the neighborhood, for their parents, both of whom have now passed away, how you can really feel that baked into the film. And it's just so, without being too heavy-handed about turning it into a gimmick, um, it feels very much like you're watching childhood from a child's eyes. It doesn't feel like it's trying to slap a very firm kind of classical narrative structure on it. It's really just an accumulation of memory, of kind of the street games that people would play to entertain themselves in Brooklyn on the streets before, computers and such kind of got in the way of the traditional childhood, shall we say. Um, and it has the quality of memory in a way that really I would only say something like a Boyhood has achieved for me,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of my favorite movies and very near and dear to my own heart, as someone who grew up in Texas around the same time as that film. So to feel like you're watching somebody else's version of that, and to feel the commonality, and to feel like there is so much that connects us, even though our circumstances might make the specifics of that experience a little bit different, that we are all kind of united in certain elements of what it means to grow up and become aware of how the world works, and the joy of learning those things and feeling those feelings. It was really just magical, and to get to share in that with Spike Lee himself, who was in peak Q&A form, uh,
Yeah, I bet.
very,
For
very, very ornery. It was really something else.
Yeah,
mm,
I think John and I had done an episode earlier on Spike Lee. I forget if it was for when The Five Bloods came out or
Mhm.
another project of his. And I remember watching Crooklyn and really enjoying it as well. Did they have a notice before the film about the famous the change that happens in the film?
Oh yes, the with the anamorphic lens, kind of making the stuff whenever the girl goes, or the daughter in the family goes to visit the family in the South.
Yeah.
They did
mhm.
not have a disclaimer, but they did before we went into the theater. Spike was like, "Hey, just so you know, like that's a choice. Like, don't go knocking on the projection booth. It's
Yeah,
there for a reason." He's
Yeah.
like,
yeah.
he's like, "You're laughing, but like when this movie came out, people were mad."
Right, I remember that. Like when I was getting ready to actually watch the movie, like I remember there being like things that you had to read, or like when people talk about, they always mention that.
It is a choice for sure.
Yes.
Why have you seen this one, Evan?
Yeah, I actually saw it a couple months ago because it's an anniversary year for it.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think it would have probably been much more interesting to me if I saw it with Spike Lee there, and
Yes.
hearing his
Fair, fair.
perspective. Because I think there's definitely some strong points in this. Like, I think the performances are all really fantastic in this, but I felt like the tone was just for me kind of all over the place, and I left the movie feeling very much like emotional whiplash from some of the moments. I'm not gonna say anything else because I feel like that goes into
Yeah.
spoiler territory. But I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster, which included like it was one of those old wooden roller coasters, and I had very bad whiplash when I pulled into the station at the
Right.
end of the movie.
Yeah. I think yeah, I mean, having Spike Lee there obviously is a big thing, but I think just even the loudness and the bigness, it was on a giant screen, the sound was blaring. Like the experience to me of Crooklyn is almost like the way that you feel when you're like really blasting like that Phil Spector wall of sound style
Mm-hmm.
music, where it's just so overwhelming and so overstimulating, and you just get the sense that like there's so much life happening that's just like really coming at you. And I think,
Hmm.
yeah, I can totally see how, um, under different circumstances, or less than ideal viewing state, that can feel, you focus a little bit more on how it doesn't necessarily all cohere together in tone. With my eardrums like being blown out practically, you don't focus quite so much on the nitty gritty.
All right. I think that will wrap it up, everybody. again, Marshall, thanks for joining us for this episode and sharing your experience at Venice. Obviously, for many of us who don't get a chance to get there, it was awesome hearing about the trip and some of the movies you watched on the ground there. Appreciate you coming on again. And Evan, as always, thank you for joining the podcast. And I think we had a great episode.
Yeah, for
In
sure.
2 weeks' time, we have scheduled a horror-themed episode. So stay tuned for that. And take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.